Hello, everyone. We are live again with the bootcamp, another session of a bootcamp, and today we are going to cover IAM users for AWS. It is very important topic related. It covers. It is important for every resource and everything you access within the AWS. Sazia, do you want to add anything?
Yes, whenever I develop an application, it always creates a problem that every time you have to start off with a new sign up, with a new sign in, and it becomes hectic and boring as well. I hate doing this part of the software development because there's no innovation in it, and the dangers are much that if you make a mistake and the security is not tight, somebody is going to hack you. So therefore, this is a very important topic for everyone. Zeeshan, let's get started.
Okay, so let me share my screen first. Okay. Okay, so first of all, what we need to understand related to the IAM user is basically everything in AWS revolve around roles and users and services and the policies, and everything is revolve around it. Everything you need to access or you need to you wanted to give access to someone, it needs to have some kind of role or a policy or anything. So all these services somehow access or are accessed with AWS IAM users. So let me show you first IAM users screen. By the way, we are going to cover the step number 12, grant IAM policy resources. So it means we need to see how we will be accessing the uh, resources or the AWS services or using IAM role in CDK. Okay, so first of all, if you see this screen in the IMA role, you can see we have currently I have a 5 users, groups, roles, identity providers. I don't have any identity provider, manage customers, and there are 5 important entities: groups, users, roles, policies, and identity providers. You need to understand what these things are used for, so that you can understand how every service being accessed or how you can control or you can tighten your security. So users, we have already seen how you create a user. We have seen previously. Let me show you one more time so that you can understand. Add user, we have seen done it normally. Let me add one more time. Demo BC user. We can give a programmatic access or AWS console access as well. Programmatic access means that your user can only access using the terminal or the command line, so that your code can access some resource, let's say lambda, EC2, AppSync, or anything else. If you want if you want to give any user access, so that user can come to this UI interface and can manage services. So you also allow this check, and we have seen this already. It will generate auto password. We will not going to use this user, so I'm just have to show you. Next, we need to set a permission. Now that's the important point, that either you give that user a certain set of policies, certain set of permissions, or you can add that user in a particular group. That particular group already has some policies attached to it. So either you create a group, either you can add user into a group. I'll show you how we'll be using the group, or you can copy permission from an existing user. So if I'll select this user, so all the permission from this user will come available for this user, and it will be added into that particular user, or attach policies directly. Yes, I don't need it. So you can select that I want to give administrative access, or I want to give only lambda function. So I want to give a lambda function full access. So what I'm trying to do is I have created a user, and I'm trying to give that user a certain accessibility of resources. So this user, in this particular case, if I'll create that user, this user will have accessibility to lambda functions only. So anything else, DynamoDB or the EC2 servers or AppSync, anything, user will not have any access. User can see that, but if user will try to create or do something, it will not be allowed. So I can go from this, or what I can do is I can change type. I can select a group. That particular group already has few policies. You can create group on the fly here as well, or you can create a group separately. I'll show you how we'll create a group separately. At this moment, let me say I'll give this user this group, add this group in this group. This group has few accessibilities already set to it, and then click next, and then review. And then once I'll click the create user, it will create the user and give me access ID, and we don't need that. That's why I'll not go for further step, but we will have these information, and we have done, and we have created a user. This user is needed for either you log into your AWS Amazon console, or you need to access resources using the code functionality. So that's how we create a user. The the group thing which we have discussed, what you can do is you can create a group. The good thing is, let's say your company has, or you are working on an AWS application and you have a multiple users who are accessing your application uh, as a resource. So let's say you have a team of 4 developers, so you need to give all 4 developers access so they can use AWS services. So what you need to do is you need to create a separate user for them, and then you also need to provide, maybe all 4, you need to provide same accessibility to all 4 of them. If we'll go as a step I showed you by individually selecting the services, then you have to do it every time. What you can do is you can create a group, and already exist new one. From here you can assign the accessibilities, policies to your group. Let's say this one, and then let's say DynamoDB. Let's say call it read only access. So if I'll go for the next step, it will show me that you are creating a group. This group has AWS full access of AWS Lambda and read only access of DynamoDB. Now, whatever user you will assign to this group, that user will have these two policies. So maybe your company has a 10 developers, 4 of them will have this kind of accessibility, 2 will have different kind of accessibility, and you can then create this group, and this group will be available. And once you create a user, you can assign user to that particular group. At this moment it says you do not have any user to this group. Let's say I have this group, I have 2 users, in this group I have 1 user. So you can create a group and assign users to that particular group. That's important part. Now, before going to role, let me go for the policies. So we create user programmatically access to access the programmatically, or for from the console. What policy is, which we have already seen while creating the group. If you create a group, and these are the policies. So these are the maximum amount of policies has been created by the AWS, so that you do not have to worry about normally, but you can create your policies yourself. So let's say these are policies, and they are called AWS managed policies. You can see the name AWS managed policy. So you can create your own policy as well, so that you, if you want to customize a particular service, let's say if I say DynamoDB. So for DynamoDB, I have a full access or a read-only access. But what I want is, For DynamoDB, I want to create a policy in which user can add data into the DynamoDB. User can get data from the DynamoDB, but user cannot delete data from the DynamoDB. But if you are going to give it the right access, then delete will also be available. So what you can do is you can create policy yourself. So that's how we'll see inside the code as well. So if you will understand how this is going to work from the code, it will be very easy. So now what we are trying to do is we are trying to create a policy. Now for policy, you need to understand you will assign policy to a particular service. Say that I want to create a policy for DynamoDB. I want to create a policy for lambda function. I want to create a policy for particular service. So let's say choose a service. It's trying to load services. Should not take that much of time. Okay, so these are services, and you can select any particular, or you can type a name. So here is the DynamoDB. So I'll select DynamoDB. Now it will show me actions. So what type of action you want to allow? So whoever user or a role will have this policy will have only those actions available or allowed in that particular service. So in case of DynamoDB, you can see either you can call all DynamoDB. You need to remember this DynamoDB colon static. That means all actions. Everything available in the DynamoDB should be allowed to that particular policy, and whoever user will have that policy will have access to DynamoDB completely. What you can do is, if I'll click expand, so you can see you can specify, you can pick and choose specific actions what user can do on DynamoDB. Let's say I'll say user can list the table, user can get item from the table, user can, now you can see scan, query, get item. These are the functions we have learned during the when we were learning DynamoDB. It should have a put. Okay, it's a read, so that's why. So get item. So I want just get item from the read. From the write, what I want is only put. I want to insert data into the database, but I do not want to update. So whoever has this policy will not be able to delete anything or any kind of any action that user cannot create, will not be able to create table with backup or export, nothing. Just that user just put item, get item, and list table. User can do only these three actions on what you say in DynamoDB. Resources, so you can specify specific resource name, but generally what we do is resource, basically resource, and our Amazon resource name is a big name, so you want to specify a particular resource that can access that this DynamoDB. But at this moment we are saying all resources, and we do not want to specify any condition. So you can also specify condition that on what condition that user can perform that action. So that's done, and we will click the review policy. We can name it like new policy. You can see it's showing us a few details, and click create policy. Okay, so this policy has been created. Now what you can do is there are 788 policies. Few of them, 3 or 4 I have created. Otherwise, all of them are provided by AWS, and they are most extensive, so you do not have to worry about. Avoid providing administrative access. That means whoever user has this administrative access, that user can do whatever he or she want to do with your AWS, and that's a costly thing. So all the services are available. What I'll do is filter, use for permission, no, customer managed. Okay, so customer managed, that means I have created these policies. So you can see there are a few policies which I have created to test. The policy we have created just a moment ago is new Dynamo policy. That's the policy, and you can see this policy has these particular details. So that means you can create a policy. Now you have the policy. What you can do is either you can assign this policy directly to a user, or you can assign this policy to a group. Let's say if I'll go to a group, and if I'll let me create a group just to show. Now I can see DynamoDB policy. I'll click on this and next step and create group. Now this group has only DynamoDB permission, and inside the DynamoDB, user can only put item, get item, and list table. So whatever user will be assigned to this particular group, that user will have only those permissions. So you can manage permissions this way. Then we have another important thing, which is role. Now role is very important thing in case of an AWS. Role is a similar to user, but it has a few differences. So it is not like you will assign a role to your user. You will not be assigning a role to a particular user. Role itself an entity of a kind of a user. But the difference is you can role can have multiple policies. So you can assign policies to particular role. And when we are going, where we are going to use it, basically what AWS did is did something interesting is every service needs to have a permission to access another service. So let's say if you have a lambda function and your lambda function wanted to access DynamoDB, then lambda function need to have permission to access the DynamoDB. Otherwise, lambda function will not be able to access the DynamoDB. So in that scenario, generally we create a user so that we can access a resource from our code, or we can give a user so that user can open up a interface, web, Amazon and AWS interface, and access the resources. But if a particular service want to access another service, then you have a role. So what you will do is you will create a role for a particular service, and then you will give permission to that particular role so that that role can access. So role is some kind of parallel to user, but with one or two differences. But the important difference is it can be assigned to services. And another important difference is a particular role can have a multiple policies, and you can assign role to multiple services. So let's say, let me create a role. Now, there is another important thing. What type of role you wanted to create? Either you wanted to create a role for AWS services. Let's say you want to create a role for Lambda, so that Lambda can access anything or not. You want to create role for another AWS account. That means I have an AWS account, Sir Zia have an AWS account. What I want is I want to give Sir Zia an access to my AWS resources. So for that, I can give accessibility to Sir Zia's account. So I'll have the account ID of Sir Zia, I'll provide it over here, and then Sir Zia's account can access my resources, and whatever policy I will allow, services I will allow inside that account, that will be available to Sir Zia's AWS account. We are talking about AWS account. The third one is web identity. Now, the web identity, basically the web identity and SML, they are basically an external services. Let's say you do not want to manage your user or your user directory inside the AWS. You want it to create a separate directory. Most of the companies or in bigger organizations, they have their own what you say user directories. They have their user directories and their accessibility, user ID and password, everything available, which is a unique inside the organization. So if they to wanted to use AWS, but they do not want to create all those users. Let's say maybe for an example, if a company has 100 developer and they want all of their developer to use AWS and that particular account, company already managing user directory by itself. So company do not want to create another user directory inside AWS. So a company can use this web identity. So it will be a bridge kind of thing. So user directory will remain in company's user directory and they will connect it somehow. AWS provide this facility, so you can create a provider and then you can attach this. In that way, these user will not be a hardcore user of AWS, but they will be available in AWS so that they can access the services of AWS. Because to access AWS service, you must have an accessibility to AWS service in case of role, policy, or permission. So you need a bridge. So that's what this web identity and SMIL. SMIL is a standard authentication language provider. So these two are for that. In our case, at this moment, what we are going to, so that's why I was saying that role is somehow parallel to user entity. Now in case of AWS service, because at this moment what we want is we want to give permission to our services. Let's say, as they are saying, common uses of lambda, or you can select any particular service. If I select lambda, that means I'm creating a role for lambda service so that lambda function can access anything. So I'm creating lambda. Allows lambda function to call AWS service on your behalf. It's already mentioned also over there. So that your lambda function can call other services on your behalf. Next. Now we are back to the policies. Now we'll be assigning policies. So we have created the user and assigned policy to that user. We have created the group and assigned policy to the group. We are creating a role and assigning policy to the role. So everything is directing toward the policies, and policy is the main thing, or permission, it is called permissions or policies. This is the main thing. So whenever you wanted to give any access to anyone, that's the main thing. You can also create from here, or what I'll do is I created my policy. That will be that creation of this means my lambda function can access DynamoDB, and inside the DynamoDB, lambda function can call get item, put item, and list table. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give access to lambda function, but lambda function can only call as we have seen in our previous examples. We have created the DynamoDB table and we were using AppSync. We were adding data into the table, the DynamoDB table. We were deleting and updating everything. So we have seen all these things. Because we have given the full grant access, I'll show you that also as well in our examples. At this moment, if I'll assign this policy, that means lambda function will have access to only DynamoDB, not other service. So lambda function cannot access any other service, only DynamoDB. And role name, my new lambda dynamo, just to mention. Okay, so policy will be, they're showing this is the policy available to it. Create role. Okay, so my new lambda dynamo, that's my role, and this role has this particular policy. So you can provide any policy, full access DynamoDB, or you can provide what you say, uh, access, administrative access, or EC2 access, or AppSync access, whatever access you wanted to provide to your particular role. Now this particular role is for lambda function. That's you need to that should be clear in our mind, that whenever we create a role for particular service, so that particular service can access other resources. So you can see this policy here, and you can add more policies if you wanted to add other policies to this role. So now the good thing is, either in case of user or a group or a role, you can assign multiple policies. So I want to give lambda function DynamoDB access. I want to give lambda function CloudWatch access. I want to give lambda function maybe EC2 instance access, or any other service access. So that's how you can assign particular policy to your role.
Zeeshan, will the lambda function at this stage, if I assign this role to a lambda function, will it be able to call another lambda function?
I have not checked that, but no, I have not verified that it will be able to call another lambda function or not. So we need to see, because it needs to call the HTTP API. So HTTP call is itself another service, so it might not be able to call it.
Yeah, I suspect that even for a lambda function to call another lambda function, you have to give it access.
Yeah, I just connected, because to call another function, you need to call an HTTP call. You need to do an HTTP call, and HTTP is in a separate call, is a separate service, and for that we might also need to have that permission as well. But that's the interesting part, because on the face of it, IAM user looks quite simple, and sometimes it's look quite complicated. So if you get the understanding, the root is policies, everything is inside it, you can create it, and you can customize at a granular level. That's the interesting part. That in case of Dynamo, there are many functionalities, many actions available, but I have given only 2 or 3. So that's the very interesting and important part of this complete IAM policy and management services. Okay, so now identity provider, that's what I was mentioning, that if you want to create
one more thing, we have created a rule, but we have not assigned it to a lambda function yet. It applies to all lambda functions, or you have to specifically assign to a particular lambda function?
No, the lambda function on which we'll assign the role, that lambda function will only be able to do this.
Right now, we have just defined it. We have not.
Yeah, we have just defined. We have not used it. We have just defined it.
Yes.
So either we can use, we can do it within the code, or deploy the lambda function and then go to the interface and change the roles. You can do that inside the UI interface as well. So I'll show you.
Can the role have a expiring date or something like that?
I suspect that, because role is I don't think so. Yes, maximum session duration. No, it's a session duration. It's not in. So I'm user switching role to the console count the duration of user APIs. No, the role does not. At this moment, I'm unable to verify this, but we'll see. We have a revoke session. Date less than token issue, policy creation time, revoke active session. No, I suspect that. So we'll have to see if this is possible or not. Okay. So that's the important part in case of role. So it's not, role will not be assigned to user. That's another important part. You will not assign a role to user. You will assign policy to user. You will assign group to user. a group will have a policy. Okay, the identity provider, I have already explained that if your company has a separate user directory and you want to, and that users need to access the AWS services, so you need to create some bridge between your company's users and users can access inside the AWS. So that's what you do from here. So that's a separate because you need an identity provider. Let's say you have a user list in Google. So you have a lot of all of your users inside the Google console, and you need to connect the Google console from here. So all those users will have a particular new ID inside the AWS, and then that user can access any service from what you say AWS, and inside the role you can assign them separate policy based on whatever uh, service you wanted to access. So that's how these five entities work. So we need to understand them first, so that you can once you know this what is going on, then it's like a charm. So you do not have to worry about it. You do not feel any problem after that. Okay, so now let's move to the code. So what we will be going to do. So we'll be using this step. I have created the basic example. Another important part is uh, what CDK does is CDK with CDK, the benefit of CDK is in case of every resource we work with in using the CDK, they have given us some multiple default services and multiple default properties which are being created, assigned behind the scene, and we don't know about them. Roles is one of them, because even to execute a lambda function, you must have a role. So if you do not have a permission to execute lambda function will not be executed. So even for that, you must have a permission to execute a lambda function. So I just forgot to show you. Let me show you this. So it's they have given quite tight security. If you understand it correctly, you will not face any problem of uh, services which is being misused. Lambda basic execution. AWS basic execution role. This role must be available assigned to the role lambda function. Then a lambda function will be executed. Otherwise, it will fail. And this role also has a cloud watch. So whenever we create lambda function, we have seen from the day one, we create a lambda function, and if we want to check the logs, so we can go and see the CloudWatch logs. We never knew how CloudWatch is available as a logs with the lambda function. So it is done by this rule. I'll show you how this role will be assigned. We'll not do anything, and it will be assigned to. So that's the benefit of CDK. So for CDK do many things by default. What I'm going to do is I'll add a lambda function and inside that yes. I'm picking the default code of lambda function we have created in our step 2. So just basic syntax of lambda. So that's the basic lambda function. um, and nothing else inside it. So that's basic function. And for that, what we need to do is we need to provide the okay. So lambda, I have already installed these libraries. We do not have to install it. What we have is hello, the name new lambda dot function, this hello handler, or new lambda, whatever the name you want to assign it, and the runtime and the lambda function, the property, the folder name in which we have the lambda function and the handler. That's it. I'm not going to do anything else, and I'll just execute this. Build CDK. We were always facing this screen, but we were not putting any much effort to understand it, and I was just providing yes and then go ahead. So CDK was showing us that what CDK will do behind the scene related to the accessibility of that particular function. So see what CDK is showing us. It will create a service role. The resource will be accessed is your lambda function, new lambda function. We named our function new lambda function. Effect is allow. There are two kind of effects. I'll show you allow or deny. So if you want to deny, let's say you have 100 of services or policies and you want to deny 2 or 3, so you can do this as well. Assume role. So this lambda function, this role will assume lambda function service. So this role, it will create a role, and that role will be for lambda function. So all your services, if you are using AppSync, so it will be appsync.amazonaws.com. If you'll be using EC2, then it sns.aws.com. And another thing what it's showing us is it will create a policy, it will use a policy, a manage policy. It's showing manage policy. AWS Lambda basic execution role. That's why we were able to call the Lambda function, and we were not facing any problem because CDK was doing it behind the scene, and we never knew that. Before going into that, let me show you my dashboard. I have 12 roles, 7 groups, 5 users. So the role will increase. That's why I'm showing you here. Okay, now I'll say yes. On further, when I'll add AppSync, you will see more roles. So there are many things which were done behind the scene by CDK. That's why it's quite easy to work with the CDK to set up complete services. Okay, so we'll see a cloud formation will be created for us. and we will have lambda function as well. So cloud formation and lambda function. So it just created the what the name is. It's a demo IMA1, so that's our stack. And resources, we can see resources from here. So it is showing that. So we have discussed previously that when we create a stack, it shows all the resources created or used by your stack. So you can see metadata, lambda function, and a role. So if I'll refresh this screen, you can see 13 roles. AW has created another role for me, and the name of that role is, yeah, because it's my application name is demo IMS, so that's the role. And this role has AWS Lambda Basic Execution Policy. So that's why that Lambda function will be executed easily, and you do not have to worry about it.
Zeeshan,
Yes.
one thing I don't understand is what is the difference between applying a role or for a user? Roles can be applied to roles users also. Can you create a role?
No, basically we do not apply role to a user. User have a policies.
Users have policies, but I'm saying
You,
when you said there are 4 ways roles can be created. Can you go back to the page? Roles, create
yeah,
role.
yes, just a moment.
The first was
Once in
AWS Service.
AWS, yes.
Another was
And
AWS. This one is AWS another account.
yes, another account. Let's say your account. I can access. I can give access to your account. So you, let's say, the one way of creating a user is I'll create user inside my AWS account. Another way is I'll use your AWS account to give access to you. That's the separate thing.
Therefore, all my IAM users which are created in my account will get access to your AWS account.
No, 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 no. You need to specify then policy inside your IAM roles as well. It will give you the root user access, and then you can specify further inside your account whatever kind of policies or accessibility which IAM user I need to give. Then you can drill down there as well.
So basically, most of the time you will be using roles basically to assign to services.
Yes.
This
The
is
other one is basically a bridging. Other three portion are bridging basically the different users available on different account or different services, and you want them to available here and access the resources. So basically the concept is same, that you want to give accessibility to resource to another resource. So because it's in a separate entity, that's why they are calling it this way.
okay.
Okay, so we have this policy available to this particular lambda function. If I'll go to the lambda function, and because we do not want to execute it, I'll just run it as a test case. Configure a test. So that I can run the function directly on AWS server. Cannot find module. Hello. Oh, that's the index. That's my bad. Again, you need to be vigilant while copy pasting. Okay, so I'll just update it, and so let me just show. It will give you output, but what we need to see is inside the Yes, let me close it. This notification permission. We have a tab of permission. Inside this permission, it is showing us a role name. So this is the same role which is available to us here, which is created by the CDK by default. Now what we can do is we can edit or delete this role. Let's say I'll go to edit and I can change particular role. I can delete that role as well. So what it will do is it will then the lambda function will not be. I cannot delete from here, but I can delete from this is it deployed? Yes, it is. It is deployed. So it's working. Output is here. Let me just go delete this role. Now that's the a separate thing. We are doing something manually. We are deleting a role manually, and we have created a code with the code as a in. We have created a stack with the code. So if I'll go and test. Why it is working? It should give us an error because role has been deleted or this role has been deleted. So it should give us an error. Maybe it's being updating behind the scene. So once you are done with that, what you can do is you can create the one we were talking about as the role which I've created, this new my demo lambda. This policy has only DynamoDB policy. So let me add another policy inside it, which is to execute lambda. Attach the policy. So my this role has two policies so that it can execute lambda function as well. And once I'm done with it, what I'll do is I'll go to this permission. Now you can see the role within demo has been deleted. It should give us error now. Yes, error started to occur because there is no role. So you will not be able to even get this. Now what I can do is go to edit. Yeah, must noted that I'm doing this manually. This is not recommended if you are using the CDK. Then it is not recommended, just to show you guys what we can do. So I'm switching the role and save. It's executed again because I have given it two policies. One is to execute lambda function and another is to DynamoDB. Now, if this function had the dynamo get and put code, it will be work as well. So that's how you play around with these roles and policies. Now, what we need to do is we need to see how we'll be adding the policies in from our code. That's the important part for us. So so let's keep state sync. So you can name it anything. Let's say GraphQL API underscore new, whatever name you want to give. Should have a schema. So let me create this schema folder, GraphQL, and we have well, and I'll initially maybe we need, I'll copy this from the example as well, but string, that's our schema. And inside our code, these are the steps we have already done quite many times, so we do not need to go into detail, but that's the AppSync, how this is how you create the AppSync structure. You provide the schema and authorization and all this thing. I'm removing the X-ray, I don't need this service. Now what we need is we need to connect both of them. So for that, we need to call this lambda. Lambda data source dot create resolver. Query field name welcome. In inside our function we need code. I'm trying to do is avoid the code which at this moment we are not interested, so that event dot info dot field name switch is so at this moment we don't need this as well for now, but will require in a moment. Okay, so this is the simple function. AppSync will send a welcome query and will handle that welcome query from this function, and that's what we have a schema. So at this moment we have this schema, but I'll update it to show you further detail. And this the okay. Now let me show you. Oh, deploy it. It should be deploy. CDK and build. So now you will see another important part. We already have these accessibilities created. So I have just deployed same stack again. So it is not showing these two because they have been already been created. So what new needs to be done is it's creating a GraphQL role for GraphQL service and creating a role for AppSync. So AppSync, because AppSync want to access Lambda function. So that's again a default created by default. And the resource and what action needs that AppSync, it's a lambda function invoke function. So AppSync can invoke a function. So even AppSync cannot call a lambda function. We were doing it like we do not have to do anything, but behind the scenes CDK was creating a role for us that will be applied to AppSync and allowed AppSync to access the lambda function. So it will be deployed and work. We do not have to worry about now. What we can do is now we have this. If you can see, we can create role by ourselves and then provide service principal. I'll this it has a four kind of principles which we have seen in the role case of role. AWS is a service principal, account is it's an account principal, and it's called identity principal, I guess. So we have three or four principles. I'll show you. So we need to create role and we are saying assumed by. Let me show you. Okay, so I just need to delete it actually. You can see action assumed role. So this is exactly the same. We will be calling assumed by service role, and then we'll giving a policy. I'll explain this. So we're creating a policy statement allow, and we are saying allowed everything inside DynamoDB, allow everything inside logs, all the resources. So we are giving a lambda function. So we are creating a role for lambda function, and we are saying this lambda function can call any function for inside the DynamoDB and any function related to the logs. So it can call the logs, and then we'll assign this role, this policy to the role. So role dot add policy. So this role will have this policy, and this policy says DynamoDB and logs. So that's how you assign policy to role within our CDK code. Then we need to assign that role to lambda function using the code. So you can see here role. So that's how lambda function will get the role, and then lambda function will have the access to that particular service or code. Okay, so the problem is I have deleted the one of the role. That's why it's causing the problem to CDK destroy. I need to call destroy. That's the problem. If you do something manually behind inside the interfaces, then you will break everything from your CDK. So you have to go and destroy or clean everything, and then you go to work. Okay. So let me show you the error again, what it was saying. It was saying DM this particular role does not exist because it's trying to set up a application and it's assuming that we have already have a role. Okay, so let's not deploy this. I just explained it that it will create another role, and we are good with that. So I'll show you that we need to create a table. We have seen these constructs quite many times, so that's why I'm focusing more on related to the IAM users and policies. Okay. So now we have created the Dynamo table and we need to give it a name. So name, let's say my product table. Now this lambda function wants to access this DynamoDB table. Previously, in our previous examples, if you guys remember, we have a function called DynamoDB table dot grant full access. This is again provided to us to give us accessibility easily. So many constructs have, so in case of assigning a policy or roles, you have a two ways: create a role, create a policy, and then assign a role to particular function. So you can assign a role to lambda function, or you can do a vice versa. If a construct has such functions, so many of the constructs has grant type of functions. So you will see many of the resources will have grant, full access, grant, read data, grant, write data, grant, stream, grant, write data. So you can, what you can do is, let's say if I'll say grant, read data, and I'll give it a name. We have seen this previously. What it will do is it will give DynamoDB is giving full access to Lambda function, so that Lambda function can access the DynamoDB. So from the DynamoDB perspective, we are saying grant read access to Lambda function. That's how it's going, it's working, and we were doing it previously. Here we are not going to do use this method. What we are going to do is we are going to create a role. Okay. So we have a role in AWS IAM user. So again, these services need to be installed separately, and hopefully from CDK 2.0 we do not have to do this. So we are creating a role exactly similar like we have done from here, from this screen. So we are creating a role and we are selecting a service lambda. So we are creating a role, let's say my lambda role, and we are creating a service principal, and we are saying lambda.amazon.aws.com. So if you wanted to do AppSync, you will say AppSync. If you want to do SNS. So all the services, the name of service, you will replace it from here, and the role will be created for you. This service principal, we have account principal, and we have web identity principal, as you can see here. Web identity principal as well, open connect principal. So we have all this kind of principles, but at this moment we need to use service principles. So basically what we are trying to say is that we are creating a role which will give a particular service accessibility with the way I have shown you in the user interface. So we are creating that particular role, and then we need to create a policy statement. So each policy can have a multiple statements. So we can create a policy statement separately and add to a role, or we can create a policy, add those policy statement into the policy, and then assign that policy to the role or whatever service you want to assign it. IAM dot effect dot allow or deny. What you can do is you can create like something like this. So what it will do is it will give access to everything. You are giving access, or if you say I just wanted to give, I just want to deny the permission of DynamoDB and logs. You can have access to any other thing, but not DynamoDB and logs. So it's a vice versa. So you can do this way. And now in our case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give DynamoDB access, but only put item and get item. How we will be find out, I have already shown you, but let me show you again. Inside the policy, when you try to create a policy, DynamoDB, all the actions available here. So you can expand, and I told you that remember this DynamoDB colon static. So if you call DynamoDB colon static, that means all the actions available in DynamoDB are allowed to that particular policy statement, and whoever we assign this policy statement will have this access. So you can see this, let's say if I'll call get name, so that means you are saying DynamoDB colon get name. If I'll say get record, so you are saying DynamoDB colon get record. So you can verify all of your services and you can get the action names from this. And this action, you can, if you wanted to learn what this action will do, so you can see that there is a description and you can understand it. Okay, so what I'm saying is I'm creating a policy and I wanted to give DynamoDB put item and DynamoDB get item. So I've given two separate, and I'm giving complete access all the resources. So otherwise we need to provide the resource name. So we are not going into that. So created a role, created a policy, and then role.add policy. So we are assigning policy to that role. Then after that, what we can do is we can control. So we have assigned this role to that particular lambda function. So only this lambda function have this accessibility. Otherwise, no other lambda function will have DynamoDB access until we provide it. Now the benefit is we can assign this role to multiple services. So we have a 10 lambda functions. All we can assign this role to all those 10 lambda functions. So all those 10 lambda functions will have this role. So maybe you want to give your lambda function DynamoDB EC2 and AppSync, not AppSync, maybe S3. So once you create a role and policy for this, then you can assign these role and policies from here. So let me show one more thing. I'm creating another policy, and that policy I wanted to create logs column static. So we do not want to deny, we want to allow. Okay. Once we are done with it, we can use this in this way, and we have assigned the role. Now this function can call a function inside the lambda function. So here what we can do is so we need to create notation. And return let's make it data. This mutation we have, so we get this create data here, and now we need to call a code that will add something into the database. Okay. Now we need this. Okay, so param table name we are accessing, we are trying to access from the environment So for that, we need to call say a table dynamo table dot table name. Okay, so we can give environment variable on to lambda function like this as well. It will be available here. Okay, so we will receive argument. That's the same thing we have seen previously. How it work await. White. There seems to be some problem. I will see. So that's the function. Basically, we do not have to worry about this functionality. We have to worry about how the service will work and how the account will be created. So that's the lambda function we have. And I need to create a resolver for rotation.
Zeeshan, I can see where you gave permission to lambda function to access a table, but I can't see uh, permission on the table so that it can be accessed by the lambda function.
Basically, it's a different direction. You are creating a role for lambda so that lambda can access any service on your behalf. So you are creating a lambda function, you are creating a role that I'm creating a role for lambda function. As we have seen, we create a user and give that user a permission that this user can access DynamoDB, this user can access AppSync, and this user can access EC2. Same is the case. We are creating a role for lambda function so that that lambda function can access DynamoDB, that lambda function can access EC2, that lambda function. That's how it's being done. So that's why we have created the role for the lambda function, and then we say this lambda function can call put item and get item in on the DynamoDB, and we assign this role.
It does not say which table,
Which
which tape, which DynamoDB database and which DynamoDB data table.
Yeah, we have not specific. That's not specified in. So we are basically giving access to the DynamoDB. We are not giving access to the particular table. Maybe yes, you can. In the case of resources, what you can do is because each service has, let's say, each service has a resource name. So what you can do is, if you have table, so that table must have a resource name. Just a moment. If we have this dynamo table dot ARN table ARN. So what we can do is table ARN. We can give this table ARN to here. Then this lambda function can only access that particular table. This lambda function cannot access any other table.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Okay, now that's done. That's done. What I was saying. Yes, I was creating a resolver for create, and it's. I don't know why it's appearing in white. It should be Response param. Try to run it in. Okay, see. Now it's saying it will create role for apps. It will create a role for AppSync. It will assume role. This is the one which we are creating. So my lambda role, and it's available. Yeah, my lambda role. And what it will do is it will work for the Amazon lambda. It's creating the policy for the invoke function, and you can see table ARN, and you are saying get item and put item. So we are assigning a specific resource, the table ARN which we have provided, that resource can have only get item and put item calls, and we are giving all the resources and access to the logs, so it should not be static as well, so we can change that as well, but let's leave it for a while.
Zeeshan, at this stage, I would like to just please complete this, then we'll discuss something.
Sure. I'll just execute the thing, and it should be working fine. So we are actually done with this example. It will just works if it work ideally, so that means we are everything is fine.
Zeeshan, I have a question. The
Yes.
thing is, up to now, before CDK, most probably the operations guys were different from developers.
Yes.
Now, the development code is so integrated with the structure of the services, as we have seen in this IAM user roles and all this stuff. I
Yes.
doubt that a person who does not understand the code will be able to create these policies. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes, because now we have integrated it tightly. It seems like tightly integrated. The infrastructure is tightly integrated with the code. So as we have seen, we are creating the function. But the good thing is the code of stack. If you try to understand it, it's completely related to the stack as well. It does not have a code related to the
No,
logic.
I understand. What the thing is, I understand that currently with CDK, it becomes very logical. A single person who is doing accessing writing the lambda function, he also gives permissions. But previously, when other persons were doing it, there are bound to be tremendous problems. Because just like, for example, I'm not a graphic designer. Anytime I need an image, I go to a graphic designer and then wait up on him to give me a design. And until he gives me the picture, I can't do anything else.
Yes. So same is the case of here, because if you will not have an IAM policy, you will not have an IAM role, and the proper accessibility, you will not be able to call the services properly.
A graphic designer, if I need something from a graphic designer, I can have a image, a dummy image. But here you can't even do that.
Yes. You must have a policy or resources available. Okay, so it's giving me some kind of a schema creation status is filled with detailed internal variable. while saving the schema. So schema has some problem.
I think, Zeeshan, I
Mutation.
think you have
Yes.
explained it. You must be tired. You have talked for 1 hour 20 minutes now,
Okay.
and
So
you will have just to finish it off and summarize and finish it off.
okay. So just to summarize, it should be working. Might be some error with the schema. So I'll figure it out, and you can also figure it out as well. The important thing, what you need to understand, we have a few entities: user, user group, role, policy, and identity providers. Everything drives, every permission drives from the policy. So you give access, if you want to give any kind of access, uh, let's say DynamoDB or AppSync or EC2, you can assign policy. So you can create a user, so that particular user can call the code and do anything user wanted to do. For that, you need to create a user and assign a policy to it. If you have multiple users doing same thing, then you will create a user group and you will assign user to user group, and then you will give policies or permission to user group. If the good thing is, like, you need to give access to a particular user, exactly you need to give access to a permission to a particular service, so that that service can access to another service. So for that, we have a roles, so that one service can access another service. So we need to create a role, and then again you will assign a policy to that particular role. And the good part of policy is that you can control it at a granular level, as I showed you, that you create a DynamoDB service policy for DynamoDB, and you can say you only wanted to give a get tables list table accessibility to that particular service. So lambda function can only, so you can customize it at the granular level. And as you can see, there is 170 services. Each service have many year of actions, so it's quite extensive and quite huge. They have managed it quite well. Once you are looking from the perspective of CDK, so it's everything quite simple. Otherwise, it was very scattered. Okay, so you create a role, assign policy to that role, and then assign that role to a particular service, so that service can access anything else. For that, you have this. I just wanted to show uh, this link already available inside our example. You must read this code overview, so it will show you how you can create user and group. We have seen creating a user and group from the code as well. So you can assign user to a policy, or you can assign policy to a user. So you can do it vice versa. The functions are available to us, and the permission. So you can read this in detail, and you will have all the information available for you. uh, that's main thing. As you can see, policy statement, you have given multiple principal access. And so if you understand what we have discussed in today's class, then everything will be a charm for you, easy for you. So you can connect all the dots, and it will be easy to implement, uh, customize it, because there are more to it while working with the policies and principles.
Okay, thank you, everybody. See you in the next class, and bye bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.